The room hung heavy with an oppressive silence, disrupted solely by the rhythmic ticking of the aged clock on the wall. Across from me, Mark, my husband of 3 decades, remained engrossed in the television, his attention as distant as ever. I sat in quiet contemplation, drowning in the weight of unspoken grievances and suppressed anger that had accumulated over the years. I reached a breaking point. "Did you finish moving?" The Mark's voice, laced with habitual condescension, shattered the stillness. Without meeting his gaze, I calmly responded, "I'm leaving." Internally, a tempest raged, yet my outward demeanor remained composed. Mark scoffed dismissively. "Oh, really? And where will you go?" "In. You can't survive without me." His words stung, but they'd also ignited a newfound determination within me. That securing his dismissive demeanor and his mother's constant interference had lasted long enough. It was time to reclaim my life. "I'll manage," I declared, standing up. This term empowerment surged within me, eclipsing the fear and uncertainty that lay ahead. For Mark's mother, who had been living with us for the past year, entered the room. Her eyes narrowed as she observed my packed bags. "Running away, are we?" She sneered. "I knew you didn't have the spine to handle this family." Ignoring her, I seized my bags and headed towards the door. Mark made no move to stop me. Instead, he called out, "You'll be back. You need us." Stepping outside, a sense of liberation washed over me. The cool evening breeze felt like a soothing balm to my stifled soul. I didn't know where I was headed, but for the first time in years, a glimmer of hope flickered within me. For 3 decades, I had played the role of the dutiful wife to Mark, a man who viewed me more as a convenience than a partner. For some, Alex remained the sole beacon of light in my life. But even Alex, my son, couldn't mend the expanding void in my heart. Sections, mocking mothers, with her ceaseless criticisms and manipulations, only fueled the toxicity within our home. I secured a modest yet peaceful apartment, my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe and think without the weight of judgment. In the following days, I turned a deaf ear to the barrage of calls and messages from Mark and his mother. Their tones fluctuated between pleading and threats, but I had grown immune to their attempts. My coworkers at the library, where I had worked part-time for years, were a source of support. They had witnessed the gradual loss of my spirit and now observed my rebirth. As I settled into my new routine one evening, my phone rang. It was Alex. "Mom, are you okay?" "I am." "Alex? Alex, better than I've been in years." I replied, my voice unwavering. "I'm proud of you. Dad and Grandma, they're not taking it well. Dad's been drinking, and Grandma won't stop talking about how you've abandoned them." For a pang of guilt struck me, but I pushed it aside. "They'll manage. Alex, they need to learn to respect others." There was silence for a moment. "I'm glad you're finally thinking about yourself." "Lemony, are you? Let me know if you need anything." As I hung up the phone, I recognized that this was just the beginning. Mark and his mother had underestimated me for years. It was time to demonstrate that I was no longer the woman they believed they could control. My journey of self-discovery and revenge had just commenced in my small apartment, surrounded by the few belongings I had taken with me. Picturing reflecting on the past 30 years with Mark, our once promising marriage had disintegrated into a mere shadow of what it could have been. It all started blissfully. Mark was charming and attentive, and we were young, full of dreams. As the years unfolded, the once charming facade faded, unveiling a man more engrossed in his own desires than the needs of his family. The birth of Alex, our son, was anticipated to bring us closer, but it merely underscored our disparities. Mark's concept of parenting revolved around financial provision, leaving the emotional nurturing to me. Eleanor, his mother, perpetually loomed in the background, her critiques of my parenting a persistent drone. "Annie, you're coddling the boy too much," she would assert, while Mark brushed off the need for such care. During her constant jibes, I focused on raising Alex, who blossomed into a thoughtful and independent young man despite the tension at home. The turning point arrived when Eleanor moved in with us, a decision Mark never bothered to discuss with me. I returned home one day to find her bags in the hallway. "My house is too lonely," she declared, a manipulative glint in her eye. Living with Eleanor became stifling. She criticized everything from my cooking to my attire, always asserting that Mark could have done better. These remarks were frequently made within my earshot, adding to the suffocation of an already strained environment. What shattered me to my core was the revelation of Mark's betrayal. Inadvertently stumbling upon bank statements one day, I uncovered substantial withdrawals from our joint account, funds fueling Eleanor's gambling habit and Mark's clandestine indulgences. Confrontations ensued, marked by heated arguments where Mark consistently sided with his mother. She needs this to cope with her loneliness. He would argue dismissively, deflecting my concerns. The breaking point arrived when I overheard a conversation between them scheming to seize complete control of our finances, relegating me to nothing more than quintessential families to nothing more than an occupant in their house. In that moment, I realized I could no longer endure living a repressive shadow. The day I left, I made a solemn vow that they would one day comprehend the pain they had inflicted. My plan, though simple, proved effective. I resolved to strike where it hurt the most, their pride in their finances, initiating legal separation of our finances. I left Mark dumbfounded. "What do you think you're doing?" He bellowed over the phone, protecting myself. "Something I should have done years ago," I calmly asserted. Eleanor's reaction was even more dramatic. "You ungrateful wretch! After everything we've done for you," she screeched when she discovered the movie. The unmoved. I stood firm. The years of submission were over, and I was now playing by my own rules. This was just the beginning of their karmic reckoning. The weeks following my financial independence were tumultuous. Mark and Eleanor were furious, their true natures fully exposed in their anger. Venomous calls poured in, each more spiteful than the last. "You think you're clever." Anna, Mark hissed during one call. "You nothing without me. You'll come crawling back." "I won't." The mic. "I'm done being your puppet," I replied, my newfound strength fortifying my words. Eleanor was even more vitriolic. "You regret this." "Anna, you've ruined our family." "There was no family to ruin." "Eleanor, it was an illusion." I shot back, undeterred by their threats. I basked in the newfound sense of liberation, the fear that once held me captive now replaced by an unwavering desire for justice. It was time for Mark and Eleanor to confront the consequences of their actions. I initiated the process by reconnecting with old friends and acquaintances, divulging the truth about Mark and Eleanor's manipulations and financial deceit. The story swiftly circulated, staining their reputations. Mark, who took pride in his social standing, was appalled. "How could you do this to me?" he demanded during a rare face-to-face encounter. "You did this to yourself?" I replied calmly. I'm just shedding light on it." Eleanor, faced with the community's judgment, was equally distraught. "You've turned everyone against us. This is war." But I was no longer intimidated by her. "It's no telling her. This is justice," I asserted. I witnessed their world crumble. Mark's friends distanced themselves, wary of his tarnished image. Eleanor's once proud social circle dwindled as the truth about her gambling and manipulation came to light. However, I didn't stop there. Recognizing their financial instability as their weakest point, I enlisted the help of a lawyer to initiate the process of claiming my share of our joint assets. This move ensured that Eleanor's gambling debts were exposed and Mark's mismanagement of our finances was brought into the spotlight. The court proceedings were arduous, but I stood my ground. And Eleanor's attempts to discredit me fell flat. Their lies and deceit were no match for the truth. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me a significant portion of our assets. I witnessed the defeat in Mark and Eleanor's eyes. It was more than just a legal victory. It was a moral one. "You've destroyed us." "Anna," Mark said, a shadow of his former arrogant self. "Alex, no, Mark, you destroyed us long ago." "I'm just picking up the pieces," I replied. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I looked forward to the future, free from the chains of my past. Mark and Eleanor's downfall was the first step in my journey of reclaiming my life, and I was ready for whatever came next. The aftermath of the court ruling was a whirlwind. With my rightful share of the assets, I began building a life free from Mark and Eleanor's shadow. Their reactions, however, were a mix of disbelief and fury. "You can't do this to us." "Anna," Mark exclaimed over the phone one evening, his voice laced with desperation. "I've done nothing but take back what's mine," I replied firmly. "You should have thought about the consequences before you betrayed me." Eleanor's response was more underhanded. She tried to rally family members against me, painting herself as a victim. However, her attempts were futile. "Anna, you're tearing this family apart," she accused during a chance encounter at the grocery store. This family was broken long before I left," I retorted, yielding in my resolve. I countered, refusing to give Eleanor the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I relished the freedom of living on my own terms. taking a decisive step. I changed my phone number, severing their direct line of harassment. Volunteering at a local shelter became a source of solace, offering support to others who have faced similar struggles. However, my quest for justice was far from over. Learning that Eleanor planned to contest the court's decision, still clinging to the hope of reclaiming money for her gambling habits. She threatened, "You won't get away with this." "Anna, I'll make sure of it," in a message relayed through a relative. In response, I fortified my legal defenses, ready to counter any move she made, no longer the woman who shied away from confrontation. I'd become a fighter, standing up for what was rightfully mine. Meanwhile, Storm crumbled under the pressure. His once pristine image was tarnished, and his career suffered as a result. Friends and connections he valued distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with a man caught in scandal. "You've ruined me." "Again then, you ruined yourself." "Nimrits, I just exposed the truth," I replied. As weeks turned into months, I witnessed their once secure world disintegrate. Eleanor's attempt to contest the court's decision failed miserably, leaving her financially and socially bankrupt. Mark's career continued its downward spiral, his reputation irreparably damaged. Despite their downfall, I felt no joy in their suffering. It was a necessary step in my journey, but it was not the end. I had reclaimed my independence and my dignity. I was still healing from years of neglect and emotional abuse as I continued to rebuild my life. Focusing on finding peace and happiness within myself, I emerged from the shadows of my past stronger and more resilient. My story was not one of revenge but of emancipation, a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Several months had passed since the court's decision, and the ripples of my actions were still felt. Mark and Eleanor now, estranged from most of their acquaintances, were living a shadow of their former lives. Just one day, I received an unexpected visit from Alex. He looked troubled, his usually bright eyes clouded with concern. "On street, I just came from seeing Dad and Grandma," he began, his voice heavy. "They're not doing well." I offered him a seat and a warm cup of tea. "Tell me what happened." "Alex," he sighed deeply before continuing. "Dad's been let go from his job. His drinking has gotten worse, and Grandma, she's lost everything to gambling. They're selling the house." I listened, my heart aching for Alex. Despite everything, they were still his family. "Mom, did we go too far?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Alex, we stood up for what's right. They made their choices," I replied, my voice tinged with sadness. The news of their misfortune didn't bring me joy. Instead, it was a somber reminder of the consequences of a life lived without integrity and respect for others. The following weeks were filled with whispers and rumors. Tremaine, Mark and Eleanor's house, once a symbol of their success, was now on the market. Their fall from grace was complete. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Mark had tried to find work, but his reputation preceded him. Eleanor, meanwhile, had become a pariah in her social circles. Her gambling addiction was now public knowledge. That one evening, while I was out for a walk, I saw Mark. He was a shadow of the man he once was. His posture slumped, his eyes hollow. Our paths crossed, and for a moment, we stood there in silence. "Yenna," he began, his voice cracking. "There's nothing to say." "Limut," I interrupted. "You chose your path." He nodded slowly, a resigned look in his eyes. "I never thought it would come to this," he murmured. As I walked away, leaving Mark behind, I felt a sense of closure. The man who had once held so much power over me was now just a stranger with a broken past. Eleanor, too, faded into obscurity. Her once lively demeanor was now subdued, the realities of her actions finally catching up to her. As the chapter of Mark and Eleanor closed, I realized that my journey was about more than revenge. It was about reclaiming my life and finding peace. I had stood up to my oppressors, not for vengeance, but for justice and self-respect. The experience had taught me the power of resilience and the importance of standing up for oneself. As I continued to build my new life, I did so with newfound strength and a heart ready to embrace the future. Months turned into a year since the upheaval of my life began. In this time, my journey of self-reinvention continued, with each day bringing new strengths and realizations. The downfall of Mark and Eleanor was not my endgame. It was merely a byproduct of my pursuit for justice and respect. One crisp autumn afternoon, I sat in my cozy living room, reflecting on the changes. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. "Simon, I wanted to tell you something," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. Sarah and I are getting married, and we'd love for you to help us with the planning. Some choice surged through me. That's wonderful news. Alex, of course, I'd love to help. Our conversation was filled with laughter and plans for the future, a stark contrast to the distress and despair from the past. A few days later, while out for my regular walk, I encountered Eleanor. She seemed smaller, diminished somehow. Our eyes met, and there was a brief flicker of something, regret perhaps, or realization in hers. Anna, she began, her voice quivering. I'm sorry. The apology, unexpected and late, caught me off guard. Eleanor, your actions brought you here. I hope you find some peace. As I walked away, leaving Eleanor standing alone, I realized the full extent of my transformation. I no longer harbored anger or resentment. I've moved beyond the need for revenge. The wedding planning with Alex and Sarah was a joyful affair. It was during these moments, surrounded by love and hope, that I truly appreciated the beauty of moving forward. The day of the wedding arrived, a beautiful ceremony filled with laughter and tears of joy. Watching Alex and Sarah, so full of love and promise, I felt a sense of accomplishment. Despite the challenges, we had emerged stronger. In my toast, I said, life brings many challenges, but it's how we face them that defines us. Today, we celebrate love, resilience, and new beginnings. As the evening drew to a close, I looked around at the happy faces, feeling content. I had not only survived, I had thrived. In the years that followed, or can Eleanor remain distant memories? I heard through the grapevine that they had moved away, each carrying their own burdens. My life, once overshadowed by their presence, was now my own. I found fulfillment in my work, joy in my role as a mother and friend, and peace in my solitary moments. As I sat in my garden one sunny afternoon, watching the flowers bloom, I realized this was what true freedom felt like. My journey had been long and fraught with obstacles, but it led me to a place of contentment and strength. The end of my marriage was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was the author of my own life. It's in this new chapter I found happiness, peace, and a sense of self that no one could ever take away.